Today, we're diving into an important but often underestimated topic for business owners: the little things that can make or break a sale when it's time to transition out of your company. Now, we say little because to many watching our program today, some of these details you're going to hear about may not seem as important as others, and that's just how it is. But when you look at everything, everything matters, and some of the little things may matter more than you think. And to do this and dig into this information that's so important for you today, it's my pleasure to welcome JT Kraai with Exit Strategies 360. JT, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Sure appreciate it. Glad to be here this morning.
And it's a pleasure to have you with us. And I know you're going to set the record straight on a few items that our audience needs to know about, especially as they think about maybe one day selling their company, doing an exit from their business. But JT, if you're ready, let's just talk about some of these things. We all know that a prospective buyer of a company is going to analyze the financial health, the profitability. I'm no expert, but those balance sheets, all the things that show whether or not a company is worth buying or not. But there's more to it than that. Can you touch on maybe some of the little things you see out there that may not be so little?
Sure, great question. And that's probably a 3 hour answer, but we'll narrow it down here. Um, Listen, when an owner thinks about selling, they're all big things, right? They just are. These are monumental decisions for owners, and change is scary. So, the little things that people often overlook, there's dozens of them. But I think what comes to mind first is financially. You mentioned balance sheet, which isn't as critical from my seat as the P&L. And what jumps to mind right away is the percentage points, the little percentage points that add up to a fair bit of money on the bottom line. And this happens to correspond with many owners who are getting ready to sell or retire or at least cut back. They're in late in the third quarter of their career, or they're in the fourth quarter, and they're golfing more, they're boating more, they're playing with the kids or the grandkids. And so their eyes a little bit off the ball, we'll say. And so it's easy to let a few expenses go. And there's a story that I love to tell because it's so indicative of these little things. A year ago, I delivered a valuation to an owner who was doing 20 million a year in sales, and his cost of goods was very, very consistent. And this last year, which would have been year end 23, I said, "Why is it that your cost of goods is up 3%?" And he really kind of shushed me and he said, "It's 3%, don't worry about it." And I said, "Can I please put a little math to this for you?" And he said, "Sure." And he kind of wasn't happy with me for a moment. And I said, "Your 3% on 20 million is 600 grand." And I said, "If this transacts in the seven range, seven and a half, eight, whatever it might be, let's just say seven," said, "that's $4.2 million dollars." Okay, 3% on 20 million is 600,000 times the seven multiple that he at least would have gotten, probably more. That's 4.2 million. And he just glared at me through my Zoom meeting. And I said, "Do you know where this 3% is?" And he said, "I think so." And I didn't even get the rest of the sentence out of my mouth. I was starting to say, "Can you fix it?" And he said, "Starting tomorrow." And so this 3% equated to $4.2 million. Now, many of you are not doing $20 million a year. Many are doing four, five, or six. And so maybe your 3% on 5 million is what is that? 150,000. Well, if you're going to transact at four or five, let's say a multiple of four or five, that's at least four times 150,000. That's 600 grand on your 3%. So every percentage point matters. And it's real easy for owners to take their eye off the ball and not pay attention to those percentage points late in the fourth quarter.
JT, what a great catch that was when you spotted that 3%. And at least the person that you were working with responded the way they should, seeing the value of that. So I know that those little things do add up. But talk about this if you would, the what normal looks like to a business owner. We built the company, we're running it, looks good to me as the business owner. the buyer may see it differently. Can you talk about that a bit and how that needs to play into today's conversation?
You just hit the nail on the head. They see it one way and a buyer sees it another. And because it's normal to an owner, it doesn't necessarily make it normal to a buyer. And there's a couple different things that might fall into this normal bucket. And one of them is cleanliness of books. It's one of the variables that I look at. And owners, a lot of times, and I don't want to stereotype, but it typically happens this way. A lot of husband wife combinations out there, and he's in charge of all things operations and production, and she's in charge of all things office, payables, receivables, etc. And so what happens is the books get kept a certain way for years, and it becomes normal. And then a buyer comes along and says, well, can we separate this out? Can we look at it this way? Can we track these sorts of things? And it can't. And and it can be a little frustrating because nobody writes owners a decent sized check or a big check based on hunches. They need to see data. They need to have some material to chew on and digest. If they can't get it, confidence starts to erode a little bit, and therefore the price. So I'd much rather have too much data than not enough. So cleanliness of books is probably a good place to start. And another one that comes to mind because it happens so often is what I call client risk factors. You know, these owners might have a plumber referral that gives them a lot of work. It might be a TPA, it might be a GC that's given them a lot of mitigation work, providing that the recon comes back to them, any number of scenarios. And because it's been going on for years, it just feels normal. Well, a buyer comes along and says, wait a second, 30% of your work is coming from this one source. And I've had it before, Jeff, where the one source was a brother in law to the owner of the restoration company. Well, is that work going to continue? And thank you for smiling. They don't see it as a problem. And it's a problem because all that buyer's trying to do is say, is this going to be repeatable? Is this relationship going to stick? Is that TPA going to refer as much work? Is the plumber going to keep referring? And so you get above 18, 20% with some of these client risk factors. When one customer referral source exceeds that, it gets a little sticky. And the deal structure can be driven because of it. So that's probably another key element. You know, as far as the top two, those are probably it. And if there's a third, if somebody wants a third, I guess I'd say that uh, sellers' expectations of what's required of them post close. Many people, Jeff, think they're going to sell, and 2 weeks later, they're going to be in a sailboat in the Caribbean. And it doesn't work that way. Number one, larger companies, buyers want you to stay and work for a year or two, and that's expected. And they want some rollover equity, so you're there to help protect your investment as well. They, in effect, are an insurance policy to the buyer. So when I come along and say, in this capacity, you're going to be expected to stay, and the non-compete is going to look like this, all of a sudden you can see the wheels turning. It wasn't matching up with what they had in mind. And some people are a little disappointed, but to others, it's a magical period when they can separate owning from working. And you can go to work and really do what you want for a year or two or three and not have all the weight. You know, you're not financially responsible for so many things now. So some of those seller expectations get a little tricky. I would put those three, the cleanliness of books, the client risk factors, and the assumptions by an owner, probably in the top three as far as what normal may or may not look like.
Mhm. No, it all makes sense, and it's good. It's good for those watching today to realize that when they're going to sell their business, much more may go into it than they think. Dig into these little things. And I liked your comment about the spouse working in the business, whether it's a man or woman. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not going to be the case when the new owner comes on. Usually, have you seen struggles with that as well?
I have seen struggles. And really, what I recommend to clients is try to work one of you out of a job a little bit. Not entirely,
Mm.
because there's a great deal of comfort, Jeff, in um, let's say he's again out in the field in operations and she's in charge of all things office. We've got a family member in charge of the money. They're treating it like it's their own money. They don't have somebody getting paid, $15 an hour tracking down all their money for them. And so there's a heightened level of confidence with a husband wife team. And I've worked with very successful husband wife teams that have grown companies to 20, 30, 40 million in sales, and partnerships do the same thing. I've worked with brothers, I've worked with father sons. Any kind of partnership is typically very successful that way. And so the struggle is from the buyer's seat, they realize both of you want to retire. So now it's not just me, the buyer, trying to replace one of you. I've got to replace both of you. And
Exactly.
sometimes there's so much institutional knowledge, we call it. Then you go back 20, 30 years, and we've got 40, 50, 60 years of collective wisdom in that business that's going to go out the door when I lose both of you. So my confidence level needs to be boosted by the fact that you're going to commit to stick around and train a replacement and help me make a smooth transition. If you're both out the door in a hurry, that's going to be problematic for me as a buyer.
Well, JT, I think if I was going to sell my company, I'd probably get with you on that. So I'm going to put your link in the video description below. Anyone who's watching that has questions, I assume you're available for consultation.
I would say 24/7 because that's the industry that we're in, but not quite that much. But I'm available a lot. Thank you.
Not Sundays. No Sundays for JT. All right.
Correct. Those are my precious days.
JT, thank you for this.
You bet. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.